Good afternoon, everyone. I don't even know what I'm talking about. It's not even the afternoon. Maybe for some of you, but for me, it's incredibly early in the morning, and clearly, I haven't had enough coffee. I hope you're all doing well. My name is Howard Pinsky. I'm a Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and a big good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone joining me live on Behance. If you are tuning in, let me know who you are and where you're tuning in from. We already have Edith and Hala and Jack and Lam and Vipin and Tapan and Andre and I'm gonna butcher this one. I apologize in advance. Olayanju, possibly, probably not. I do apologize, but hello everyone. If you are tuning in live, yeah, let me know where you're tuning in from. Jack says the fitness background is a great touch. I agree, because today we are getting our fitness on, but we're not really getting too physical. We'll say that for exercise. Maybe one day we'll do like a Peloton style bike Adobe XD design thing. That could be fun. I don't know. I've been biking too much lately, but we are going to be designing a fitness application using Adobe XD, focusing on getting started users. So if you're brand new to XD, this is gonna be a perfect opportunity to dive in, learn something new, pick up on some tips. And if you're a veteran like Jack and Tim and various others who are in the chat right now, who knows? You might pick up on something as well. It's gonna be fun. I hope you've all grabbed some coffee. I have a nice fresh cup right now, and I'm into this. I am into this. So, what do we have going on today? Well, we have a lot going on today, actually. Here's the schedule. We got me getting started. Adobe XD, 7:30 in the morning. It's very early. But if you're in India like Vipin, it's 8 o'clock p.m. It's not too bad. Decent. Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge with Kathleen is coming up at 9 o'clock, just after me. We've got Photoshop Compositing with Lisa and my good friend Jesus at 9:30. The Illustrator Daily Creative Challenge with Julia at 11:30. Then we've got Graphic Design with Nick, followed by the Adobe XD Daily Creative Challenge with Jesse. Kyle Webster, good friend, good colleague, at 2:30 for his draw along classes. If you have kids, take them to that class. It's fantastic. And then my head's in the way, but we've got a design off with Voodoo Val and Panda to wrap up the day at 3 o'clock. Very cool stuff. We have a lot of fun stuff coming up. I'm gonna hop over to my screen and we are going to get going. So we've got Carlos from Jordan. It's 5:30 p.m. I believe, and Alberto's in the house and Melina's in the house from Poland. Welcome everyone. Tapan is asking about the background. It is from Adobe Stock. I love Adobe Stock. Good stuff there. I'm gonna be using some stuff from Stock as well. Now, since this is a getting started class in Adobe XD, I want to very quickly, I'm still recovering from sleep, direct you to letsxd.com. A lot of great content, maybe a little bit biased. I put together most of the content, but if you are just getting started, we have a lot of different sections on Let's XD. It's including good friend Danny Beaumont put together a getting started course, and you can go through all these videos here. And then once you feel a little bit more comfortable in XD, there's a lot of different stuff on there. So after this stream, if you have some time, also follow along with the daily creative challenges. They're good stuff. But yeah, there's just a ton of content you can go through and have a good time. So thank you, Tim, for posting that in the chat. But today, we're gonna be diving in to Adobe XD for the first time, possibly. If you are brand new to XD, let me know in the chat. I will be looking for questions. But we're going to be designing out a fitness-based application. It's going to be a mobile application this time. Of course, you can design for web, you can design for desktop, whatever pleases you. And so I'm going to go ahead. Here's what XD is going to look like when you first launch it up. I'm going to go ahead and choose an iPhone XR, XS Max artboard. You're free to choose any mobile design that you want. There's a lot of different presets to kind of get you going right away, but let's go ahead and dive in to that. Here we go. All right, so here is your first artboard, and much of this might look very familiar to you. You've got an artboard in the center, you've got your tools over to the left, you've got your layers over here, down here at the bottom, which we'll get to shortly. You also have your assets and your plugins. We're definitely going to be exploring some of that. And over the next 2 days, we're going to be diving into prototyping. We're going to be diving into masking, a lot of cool things. We've got Sean, newbie in the house, Melina, totally new to this. I'm glad you joined me. And after these 2 days, if you feel a little bit more comfortable, on Friday at 2 o'clock Pacific time, I host masterclasses. So we dive a little bit more deeper. A lot of cool stuff coming up. By the way, before I dive into things, I took a look at some features that we're working on. Good stuff. It's all I can say. I like teasing people. Hey, Rufus is in the house, my good friend, also my boss. Don't judge me, Rufus. All right, so what do we have planned? So let me hop over to my notes. And usually whenever I'm planning out an application, I just like to open a notepad and just go crazy. I just throw in all ideas I possibly can about this application. What screens might I need? What the user experience might look like? You know, some people like to grab a notepad, a physical notepad. I know people still write on paper. It happens. I do it from time to time. Sometimes just that pen on paper feel, it works, right? But other times I open the notes application on my Mac and I just throw all the ideas down in no particular order, whatever comes to me. You know, I have been using a bunch of these fitness applications lately. So, you know, I included some features that I might like, some features that I might want, right? So yeah. And yeah, Ashy, a lot of coffee today. I agree. Alrighty. So these first few screens are going to act as the onboarding flow. You know, when you open up an application, it shows you a few splashy images. It shows you some information about the application. And this is where I would love some of your help to get some ideas on what this application could contain. So I'm going to start by grabbing my rectangle tool. It's this little guy over here to the left. It's a tool I probably use the most often in Adobe XD. Rectangles are great. I'm going to drag out a rectangle across my entire artboard. Now you're probably asking yourself, why are you doing that? I'm also going to change the color just so you can see this rectangle against the background. And you're asking, why am I drawing a rectangle across the entire artboard? What's the purpose of that? Here's the purpose. For this particular screen, I want nice full width images, right? That kind of encompass the entire artboard. And if I were to simply hop over to Finder, right? I've got this great image here, this one over here, right? She looks incredibly in shape. I'm very jealous. If I were to simply drag it into XD, not into the rectangle. Yeah, I agree, Vipin, always the rectangle. If I were to place it here, it's an Adobe stock image, so it's incredibly large, super high resolution, and yeah, look at the size of that image compared to that rectangle. Not ideal, right? So because I'm using a rectangle and shapes in XD can be used as masks, all I have to do now is grab the image, pop it into the rectangle. You're noticing it's highlighting in blue to let me know it's on top of there, and boop, there we go. It just masks it for me, which is super nice and super simple and super quick. And I can very easily double click on this rectangle to access that mask. So if I needed to move it around a little bit, if I needed to enlarge it, I can do that. Oops, I missed it. If I have to enlarge it, right? So you can do all these things and you don't have that overflow that you had a moment ago. All right. So next on this artboard, because we know we're gonna have some text, right? You know, you might be thinking maybe you can grab the text tool and just start typing something out. But the problem is because this image has so many different colors, you know, she's wearing a black shirt, there's a white towel, there's a blue bottle, there's a blue background. It's gonna be very difficult to choose a text color that works well. And the last thing you want to do, and I'm going to talk more about shadows a little bit later, the last thing you want to do is add a shadow to text. You probably want to avoid that. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a container that goes over top of part of this image that will allow us to house text so it doesn't get distracted by the background, right? So I'm going to grab one more time my rectangle. I should do a stream where all I design with is rectangles. Then again, that's probably every stream. So I'm going to drag a rectangle across this artboard just like that. Now there's a few ways to get creative with this rectangle. We could go ahead, if you take a look, let me zoom in. On the inside of our rectangles, we've got these little dots, right? We've got, of course, the outside nodes that allow us to resize rectangles, but we also have these little dots on the inside. And if you're brand new to Adobe XD, you might be wondering, what are these little dots? Well, if you drag them, ooh, look at that. You can round out the corners very easily. You can also hold down your Alt or Option key to drag individual corners back like that, right? And you can continue rounding out this corner. And you're probably also noticing that inside of the properties inspector over to the right, you have individual values. So you can adjust all the corners at once using the first button, or you can adjust individual ones using the second one, right? So I have 0, 72, 0, and 0, right? And that looks pretty fun, but I might want to get a little bit more creative with this rectangle. I want this to be a fun application, right? Very colorful, very curvy, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this rectangle to access its path, and I might want to add a point somewhere right about here, right? Click. Now, when you initially add a point to a shape and you move it around, it's very sharp, and that's definitely not what we want. We want nice curved lines. So in that case, I'm going to double click on the point, and it's going to give me that nice curved line. And that will allow me to grab this point over here. I can move it on up just like that, and I can start adjusting some of the curves like this. And now I've got this really nice looking shape that I can use to house some of the text on this application, or at least the onboarding flow, right? And that looks pretty good. So now that I have that done, let's go ahead and start adding some text. So with the text tool over here to the left, hey, Imtiaz, welcome. I'm gonna grab the text tool. I'm gonna simply click once, and let's go ahead and start typing something out. Let me change the color. Let me click. Whoops. Let's go for get fit and stay fit. I'm gonna change the color. Let's go for a nice red, like a pinkish red. Now, the text at the moment is a little bit too large. So very similar to the little point on the rectangle where you can pull it in or out, point text has the same thing. So you can just grab this, drag it inwards to make it a little bit smaller. You can make it a little bit bigger if you wanted to, just like that. And that looks pretty good, right? Now, in terms of the styling for this text, there's many different ways we can go about this. First of all, I want to make sure that it's centered. So I'm going to press the center button right there. Now, the typeface, you know, Helvetica is not a bad font, but of course, if you want to get really creative, you can go for Papyrus. No? Okay. Don't go for Papyrus, but something like Sophia Pro is a pretty good font. If you're designing for mobile, which we are, Apple San Francisco fonts are pretty good. Avenir Next is a great font. There's a lot of different ones that you can possibly use. And Vipin is saying, when do we use grids? Why 8 pixels is widely used. So tap on it and say, no Papyrus. That's a big question. So let's go for bold. That looks pretty good. All right. So in terms of grids, there's a few different reasons you would want to use grids, right? So there's a few, you can drag out some guides, and let's go ahead and do that actually. So over to the left and up at the top, you can drag out guides from the left side of the screen. Let's go for, let's say 24 pixels. Alberto says Sophia Pro is Howard's Bay. It's pretty good. It's a nice font. It has some nice touches to it. You're noticing like right here, the F kind of blends in with the I really nicely. It's nice. It works. Poppins is another good one that I've been using quite a bit. So yeah, we dragged out some guides. We've got 24 on the left, 24 on the right. And you know, Tim points out because most screen dimensions are divisible by 8. And he's totally right. So it just makes it a little bit easier if you're using, you know, an 8-pixel grid. Of course, you don't need to. You can use a 10-pixel grid if you want to, if that makes it easier. You can also, if you select the entire artboard, over in the Properties Inspector, you can activate your grid, right? You have a square grid and a layout grid. So if I turn on the layout grid, again, I need more coffee. You can control your gutter width, your column width, a lot of different things within this grid to really help you organize your content. For now, I'm going to keep this off. We might go a little bit dive a little bit deeper into this tomorrow. But I think for now, the 24 pixel guides that I dragged out are going to help me keep some content aligned. It may not be necessary on the onboarding screens like what we're doing now, but it may be on the home screen that we're going to get to a little bit later. All right. So we've got our title going on, looks pretty good. Now, you know, I'm liking this red. It's like a reddish, pinkish color. It's got a little bit of pink in there. It kind of works. And I may want to use this specific color throughout my application. So what I want to do is explore the assets panel. So right down here at the bottom of your interface, you're going to click on this button right here. This will open up your assets panel. And because this is a specific color that we want to save, I'm going to go ahead and press the plus button beside colors. Boop. There we go. And it's going to add this color directly into my assets panel. I can go ahead and name this if I wanted to. I don't know what should I name this? Red. Red's a great name for a color that looks like red. If anyone has better suggestions for this red color, let me know. I can also add the color character style. So I can go ahead and let's say onboarding header, right? And the benefit of this, as you'll see in a few moments, is that if you have several different artboards, you'll be able to change these colors or character styles once, and it'll change throughout all of them, which is great. So we've got that set. Now under here, we may want a little bit of a description of what this exactly, what this app is, right? What is this? Tim says, Pinsky. Yes, Tim. So I'm gonna go ahead and drag out with my text tool. Instead of clicking, I'm gonna drag out an area text. And this will allow me to confine text inside of this container, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and type out, this is a description. Helps if I can spell properly, right? Now, obviously this is way too big. So a lot of people are saying, some people are saying rink and Pinsky, hot red, ruby. I'm gonna go for ruby. Let's go for ruby. Ruby's a good color. Ruby. There we go. Hey, Raphael, good morning. All right, so obviously this text is way too big because, you know, thinking of the hierarchy, you want this header at the top to kind of be the main point, and then you want the description to fall back a little bit. So in that case, there's a few things we're gonna do. One, we're gonna drop the weight. Let's go for medium. And then two, we're gonna drop the size. 24 might work. And then we're gonna drop the color. So instead of that red color, we're gonna go for a little bit of a darker color. So it's very similar to like a paragraph text. And I'll go ahead and just add a few more lines. This of this application, get fit, right? And we'll worry about actual copy a little bit later, but for now, we've got 3 lines, which is probably the most we're gonna have in this situation. You can also adjust line spacing if you wanted to over here within your properties inspector. And you're noticing, because the text kind of exploded outside of that area that we set, that last line is kind of missing. Now what you can do, as of a recent version of XD, is you can simply double click on this point at the bottom, boop, and it'll bring all of that text back into view, which is really nice. It works the same way, the opposite as well. If your area text is larger, boop, there we go. Perfect. All right, so we've got our title, we've got our text, which I should probably fill out a little bit more, but we're gonna leave it at that. And let's go ahead and draw out some page indicators, because in a perfect world, there would be a few different areas that we can swipe between. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna grab my ellipse tool, not my rectangle this time. Of course, you could do it with a rectangle and just round out those corners, but I'm gonna grab my ellipse tool, draw out a little circle, just like this, right? Now this one is gonna be the active one, because this is the first page. So I'm gonna go ahead and sample one of these reds. I can do that, or I can simply click on it in my assets panel. Very quick access to those colors. I can turn off the border, and this is gonna be the active page. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna duplicate this ellipse over to the right, and maybe I'll just drop the opacity to about 40%, and I'll do one more. There might be 3 screens, right? I'll select all those. I'm holding down the Shift key and clicking on all 3 of them. And then inside of my layers panel, I can go ahead and make sure these are grouped. So I can either, excuse me, it's the coffee. I can either Command or Control G to put them into a group. I can right click, I can go to group. There's also an object. There's a group option under one of the menus at the top. But let's go ahead and name this page indicator. Or indicators, it's probably plural. And I'll just make sure this is nicely centered. And if I want to really make sure it's centered, up at the top right-hand corner of XD, you can just press this button right here, which is going to align the center. Boop, there we go. All right, so things are looking pretty good, right? Now, in addition to some of this information, there may be one more thing that we might want on this particular screen. You know, you've got your header, you've got your description, you've got your page indicators, which I'm going to, space out just a little bit, right? Just selecting all of these, deselecting these, and just moving them a touch. Take a quick coffee break. You know what, Richard? I think that's a good idea. We may want You know, for users who maybe have used this application before, but they're not currently logged in, we may want an area that they can sign in. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get a little bit creative with this. We're basically going to duplicate this section. So I'm going to duplicate this. Let's go ahead and actually group these. I'm going to name this container. Hey, Bohana, welcome. I'm going to group all this. I'm going to name this description, right? Oops, make us smile. I agree. Now I'm going to duplicate that container. I'm going to paste it. I'm going to move it down. Now you can't see it right now because the white is the same color as the container in the background. But if I hop over to my assets, I can apply that red very quickly. And I can use this exact same shape for the sign-in experience. Now you're probably wondering, that doesn't look like anything. How's anyone going to sign in this area? And this is where we're going to get a little bit creative, right? So I'm going to start very simple. I'm going to grab the text tool. I'm going to type sign in. I'm going to change the color to white. I might want to increase the size a little bit. Maybe I'll increase the weight to about semi-bold because it will be a call to action. And I'm going to center it just like that. Now, we are designing for a newer iPhone 10, 10S, 10S Max, 11, I don't know, there's a bunch of different numbers. So we have to keep in mind that at the bottom of the interface, there is a home indicator. And per Apple's guidelines, you can't have anything down there. So anything that you need to tap on, you just have to avoid that area. So in that case, I want to make sure that the sign in button, which is going to be tapped on, is a little bit higher, right? Something like that. That should work. Just want to make sure to line up all these items, and that looks pretty good. Now, of course, we need, when someone taps on this sign in button down at the bottom, we need something to happen. So, you know, in my mind, I kind of want this section here to fly up, and there'll be some additional information in this area that will allow a user to sign in. So what I'm going to do with this already in place, I'm going to just grab some of this stuff, move it up to cover it up, and we're going to start designing that area. And I can double click on this section to make this a little bit larger, right? Just like this. There we go. And we've got sign in. Now, there's a few things in this section here that we might need. We might, of course, need some text fields. We may need a button to actually sign in, maybe a text link if we forgot our password. So let's go ahead and create some of that stuff. I'm going to grab my rectangle. I'm going to turn on my guides, and you can do that with Command or Control and then the semicolon. That's the one. Or you can go to the View menu, down to Guides, and then you have all your guide controls right here. I'm going to go ahead and draw out a rectangle across this document, just like that. I might want to round out the corners just a little bit, just a touch. You don't want to go too crazy with this because this one will be a form field. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a second, but essentially, if you have completely rounded corners for the form field, right, then you have completely rounded corners down here for the button. Users might get a little bit confused as which is the form field, which is the button, what do I click on or tap on, right? So we're going to stick with very subtle rounded corners. And because this is a white box on a red background, we probably don't need a border. What we might want to do, just to get a little bit creative, is add a tiny bit of a shadow, right? And when I say tiny bit of a shadow, I mean a tiny bit of a shadow. I see a lot of designers, especially newer designers, do something like this. Don't do this, right? I know the purpose of a shadow is to separate one element from another, but in most cases, especially if you don't need a shadow, you don't want to do this. So what you're going to do, you're going to drop the opacity quite a bit. You're going to grab the blur, which is this value here, and you're going to increase it quite a bit. Let's go for like 24 pixels. Maybe the Y value will be about 8, sticking with that 8 pixel grid. Not necessary for shadows, but you want to very subtle, right? And if you want to get really creative, you can also add a little bit of color in this. And you can definitely start to see that it's very subtle, right? Here's without the shadow, and here's with the shadow. Very, very subtle. Again, probably not necessary, but it just adds a little bit of fun to this application. So we've got this one text box. Subtle shadows are beautiful. Yeah, please no deep shadows, yeah. So we've got this looking pretty good. Now inside of this will be, let's say, the email field. So I'm gonna go ahead and type out email address. Oops, I have my text set to white. That's not good. Let's go ahead and go for a nice dark color. I'm gonna drop the size a little bit, just like that, right? And then we're going to go for, let's go for medium. Let's see what that looks like. Maybe I'll drop it a little bit more, just so people know that this is a placeholder that they can tap into. Let me zoom out. You know what I'm thinking is, even though we have those 24 pixel guides on the left and the right, it probably doesn't have to be right up at those sides, right? So I'm gonna hold down my Alt or Option key and just drag these back a little bit. Let's go for about 42 pixels, possibly. Maybe 38. We'll see. We can always experiment. And because we're going to be using components in a moment, if we need to change all of them, we can do it. All right, so we've got email address looking pretty good, but of course we now need some sort of an icon to indicate that this is the email field. Now there's many different ways we can go about doing this. One thing we can do is we can use plugins. So I'm going to go down here to the bottom of my interface, click on the plugins section, and I do have the Icons for Design plugin installed. But if you don't have plugins installed, hit the plus button at the top, and you're going to get your plugins manager right here. You can go ahead and search for icons, for example, and there it is right there. It's a great plugin, and it gives you access to open source icons. So I can go ahead and type out email, for example. I've got some, great icons here. If you want to type out envelope or message or chat or anything like that, you can do that as well. This one looks pretty fun. It's not an envelope, but it's a little bit different, which could work. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. It's going to load it directly into XD and make it a little bit smaller. And for the color, I can do a few different things. I can choose Ruby, for example. That looks pretty good. I think that could work. Make sure it's centered. Let's go for 24 pixels from the left-hand side. And we'll go for about 16 pixels. That looks pretty good, right? Make sure it's nicely visually centered. There we go. All right, beautiful. So we now have our first field created, right? We've got our icon here, we have email address, and we have our background. Now, we may want additional text fields. Obviously, we're gonna need one for password. And the last thing we want to do is have to update this over and over and over again if changes are needed. So to make our lives simple, we're gonna utilize components. I'm gonna go ahead and select all the elements that make up this section. So this rectangle here, the email address text, and this icon. I've got all of them selected. In your assets panel, you can go ahead and press the plus button beside components. You can also do that over to the right within your properties inspector. You can use the Command or Control K shortcut. There's a lot of different ways you can make a component, but boop, there we go. And go ahead and name this text field. Now, this will allow you to do a few different things. One, it'll allow you to just drag one out and pop one here. Now, what you're gonna notice is on the original text field that we created, this original component, there is a diamond at the top left-hand corner. This lets you know that this is the master component, right? This is the original. You want to keep this one. Don't hurt it, right? And then on this one here, there is a hollow diamond. This is called an instance. So it's essentially a duplicate of the master. We're going to get deeper into components a little bit later, but the rule of thumb is if you need changes to spread and distribute amongst all of your components, all the instances, you'll want to edit the master, the one with the solid green diamond, this one right here. If you want overrides, you'll edit an instance. And what's nice about overrides on components in Adobe XD is you can override just about anything. So you can dive in here, right? I should make sure, you're noticing on this instance, I have the text center justified. Probably don't want that. So in my master, I'm gonna make sure to left justify it. And if at any point you don't know where that master is, maybe it's not on your document, maybe it's just hiding somewhere, you can right click and then edit master component. It'll take you right to it, right? So I might wanna just go for password, just like that. I can also override this icon. So if I go back to my plugins panel, I can just type out, let's say lock, for example, and let's go for, there's a lot of different lock icons. Oh boy, this is a big decision. Metro looks pretty good. I'm a big fan of the Metro icons. Feather has some pretty good icons. Now, of course, the question is, do you want solid icons? Do you want stroked icons, right? Let's go for this one. I'm gonna make sure to set the same color, make it a little bit smaller, right? So even inside of an instance, to make sure this lines up, I'm very particular with my alignment, and I can delete the mail icon, just like that. So even though this is an instance of this master component, I got rid of that email icon, I replaced it with a lock icon, I changed the text, but it still maintains its link back to the master. So if at any time I decided, maybe I do want those completely rounded corners, you can definitely do that. Or maybe if you wanted the text over here, you can do that and it updates, right? So it still maintains that link, which is really nice. Richard said, wow, I never noticed that between the component diamonds, green means a component and white means an instance. It does. And one more cool tip is you're noticing now that that hollow diamond on the instance now has a dot inside of it. What does that mean? Well, that just means it's been overridden. So some changes have happened inside of this instance, but again, it still maintains that link back to our good old master component up here. All right. So we've got our email address section, we've got our sign in or our password text field. Now we need a button, right? So Tapan is asking, is it advisable to have a master artboard for all screens? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by master artboard. Are you talking about component? But clarify that and I'll take a look at it. So we've got our two text fields and now we need some sort of a button to actually sign in. So I'm gonna grab my rectangle one more time, draw one out just to make sure everything lines up perfectly. All the smart guides are helping me throughout this process. This one, I'm going to completely round out the corners. And going back to what I was talking about earlier, this creates that separation between text fields, which is up here, and buttons. So if these ones, right, were completely rounded, all of a sudden all of these look very similar. So a user might not know that this is a text field and this is a button. So there's a few ways you can kind of create that separation. All right, so we've got this down here. I'm gonna move it down just a little bit. Maybe I'll thicken it up just a touch. And I might also want to change the thickness of these text fields a little bit. And you're noticing, because I'm editing the master component, right? It edits on all of them, which is super nice. Perfect. All right, here I'm going to type out sign in. I'll go ahead and sample this red color in the background. And this is a call to action, so let's go ahead and bold that, maybe make it a little bit larger. And there we go. That looks great. So we have our sign in button, right? Now, just like we did for the text fields, we may also want to turn the sign in button into a component as well, because we may use additional buttons throughout this process. So just like we did before, I have the text selected. Hey Ross, welcome. I'm gonna grab the container as well and just turn this into a component. Boop, just like that. All right, I'm gonna hop into my assets panel and I'm gonna name this button. And a little bit later on, maybe tomorrow, we'll get into component states, which is gonna take your components to whole new levels. And let me go ahead, I did see Tapan, it says an artboard that contains all master components. Oh, I see. That's completely up to you. I know a lot of people, especially when they're working on design systems, they'll have one artboard of all the master components. I personally don't like doing that unless I'm building out a design system. If I'm working on a project like this, then I typically just have my components inside of my assets panel, and if I need one, I'll just right click and then edit master component if I don't know where it is. But some people love that, so totally up to you. It's a personal thing. And the tone is not synchronized with your moves. Oh no, I hope the audio's not, hope the audio didn't get thrown off. Sometimes YouTube does that. I don't know why, but it sometimes throws off the audio. But let me know in the chat if that's what's going on. All right, so we've got our button here. Now, we may also want, if someone forgets their password, we may want a very quick text link so that they can remember it. Let's go ahead. Let me change the color to white. Forgot password. Just like that, question mark. I'm going to drop the size a little bit, right? Make sure it's centered. And I may want to underline this so that people know that it's a text link, just like that. And maybe I'll drop it to medium. Beautiful. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Of course, all of this will not be displayed immediately. it'll kind of be down here, which we'll get to back to in a moment. But we may also want a way for, so yeah, it looks like YouTube might be throwing off my audio again. I wish there was something I can do to fix that, but maybe it'll fix itself, but I do apologize. YouTube does that from time to time. It's a slight delay. That's annoying. It drives me crazy, doesn't it? Okay. So on this screen, we may also want a user to be able to cycle between sign in and sign up. So in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift this over and I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to type out sign up. Now, because sign in will be what a user will be on immediately by default, we want to kind of bring sign up down a little bit as a secondary option. So we'll bring this down to medium. And maybe we'll just drop the opacity just a little bit to maybe 40%, right? And you can also use the number keys on your keyboard to go to 40, just press the number 4. There we go. Now, just to really hit home that this is the sign-in experience, I'm gonna grab a line, just the line tool, draw one out, increase the size a little bit. Maybe I'll just bring it in just a touch. And there we go. So now we have sign in, sign up. We've got our email section down here. We've got our password, sign in, the button, all that fun stuff, right? So one more thing we might want to do, just thinking through this in my head, right? Because all of this is going to be contained inside of a single component. When the sign up experience happens, right? Most cases, you have an email address field, you have a password field, then you also have a confirm password field. So in that case, we're also going to add that in there, but we're going to hide it initially. So I'm going to duplicate this down. I'm simply going to type out confirm password, right? I'm going to name this one confirm. I'm going to just make sure to place it behind the password text field and just hide it just a little bit, just like that, right? Don't want to see it. I can even drop the opacity if I wanted to, just to make sure that it's not there. And you're going to see why this is happening in just a moment. So we've got all this looking really good. Now, what we want to do is we want to turn all of this stuff into a single component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure to select all the elements in my layers panel. So I've got the container and basically everything above it. So I'm holding down the shift key and I'm clicking on that first option or first layer at the top. It's got all of it selected. Now, just like we did before, in my assets, I'm going to press the plus button beside components, and I'm going to just type out sign in. And essentially, I have this entire thing as a single component. Now, I want it kind of down here, hidden at the bottom. But when someone taps on it, I want some sort of animation to take place. So let's go ahead and design out what that initial state looks like. I'm going to double click inside of it. And I'm just going to select all these elements. I'm going to move them down. Just like this, right? Now I'm going to select sign in, make sure this is kind of centered right about here. I'm going to grab my text fields. Maybe I'll stretch them out a little bit. Move them down. I'll grab the sign in button. Move these down as well. Sign up, I'll kind of move over here. And this line I'll just move down here as well, right? Perfect. So essentially, if we take a look at the preview, we've got our description, we've our header, we have our sign in button at the bottom, and all that other information is kind of hidden down at the bottom inside of that component, which is exactly what we want. So now, again, thinking this through, when someone taps on this, we want this whole section to slide up, and then we want that sign-in experience to reveal itself. So in that case, we're going to explore component states. So we have our first component set up, everything looking pretty good. Over here to the right, within your Properties Inspector, you want to press the plus button beside default state, and this will allow you to create a new state or a hover state. Because we're designing for mobile, hover doesn't really apply, so we'll go ahead and do a new state. We'll call this sign in, just like that. And now we can start making changes. Now, one thing you may be inclined to do once you have a new state created is just grab the entire component and move it up. You want to avoid that because that'll also move up the default state as well. So what you'll want to do is double click to go inside of the component in that state and move all of this information up, just like that. And now we can start rearranging things like this. We can move this down, move this up, just like we had it before, so everything looks really nice. Grab all my text fields, move those up, squish these in a little bit, grab the button and the text layer, and move that into place, right? Perfect. All right, now there's one more thing we might want to add, right? Because the red, depending on the image in the background, especially if I grab, let's say, an image here, this one here, pop that in there might be a little bit of clashing going on. So what we might want to add just to this particular state is maybe an additional, like an overlay in the background. So inside of that component, even in an additional state, I can grab a rectangle, draw one out just like that. I'm going to move it to the back of that layer stack, just like that, and maybe just turn down the opacity just a little bit to about 90%. There we go. So we have our default state and we have our sign-in state, just like that. Did you forget the social media icon? I'm not sure what you're referring to. Some apps have social icons, some apps don't. This one may have at some point. So we have our default, we have our sign-in, right? Things are looking pretty good. We also want one more state. When someone presses sign up, we might want that as well. So from this state, I'm going to press the plus button. I'm going to create a new state, and this will be sign up. And from here, what we're going to do, we're going to grab our line, shift it over under sign up, bump this up, bump this down to 40%. And we also have our confirm text layer that we hid earlier. Remember that one? So now we can bring that out, grab these, move these down a little bit, just like that. We don't need the forgot password link in this case. So I'm just going to drop the opacity and I'm going to change the text of sign in to sign up, just like that. There we go. So recapping, we've got our sign up experience, we have our sign in experience, and we have our default state. So the big question now is, how do we wire this up? How do we actually make this happen? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to hop into prototype mode, and we're going to select any layer within that sign-in experience, right? So in this case, we can select the sign-in text, and you're going to notice over to the right, there's a little bit of a handle. Now, depending on your situation, you may grab this handle and drag it all the way over to another artboard. But in this case, everything is going to be contained inside of this component. So we're simply going to click on it. And that'll give us this little wire that kind of spews out of this sign-in text. And over to the right, we can start defining these properties. In this case, we do want a tap trigger because we want a user to be able to tap on the sign-in text and something is going to happen. And then down below, we can choose either a destination artboard if we had additional ones, or states. So in this case, we want the sign-in state that we created. It's going to default to auto animate, and that's exactly what we want. And if you're brand new to Adobe XD, the way auto animate works is that it looks at the differences between either two artboards or two states, and it animates those changes. And we'll get more into auto animate a little bit later today or tomorrow. And then we can choose some easing options. Ease in and out is pretty good. A little bit slower at the beginning, a little bit slower at the end. And then we'll go for 0.6 seconds, for example. We'll see what that looks like. And now to see this in action, before we get to the other state, we'll press the play button. Here is our preview. We can tap on sign in and whoop, it all just happens. It's really nice. It's quite nice actually. Now we can also, if we choose the component, we can go to the sign-in state and we can also wire up sign up, right? So do the exact same process. Click on the layer, click on the handle, choose the destination. This will be sign up, right? All the other properties come over beautifully. We can even speed this one up just a little bit if we wanted to. And then we can go back and wire up sign in. So we'll go back to our sign in state, right? And then maybe possibly, just for this example, we'd probably have some sort of an X or something like that. From the sign-in state, if someone clicks on, let's say, the container in the background, or maybe someone clicks on this rectangle back here, this overlay, maybe it'll go back to the onboarding flow. So in that case, it'll go back to the default state. There we go. So here we go. We have our onboarding experience, which we're going to continue building on in just a few moments. We have sign in. Whoop. You can go to sign up, and you're noticing that beautiful confirm password text field kind of just falls out, right? And the text changes, that forgot password link goes away, and then we can go back to our default state, right? There we go. Vipin is asking, in XD currently have drag from left to right. Can we do the other way also? I believe so. Oh, so he's also asking, is it possible to have drag from top to bottom? It is. Basically, it depends on how your artboards are set up. Let me see if I can very quickly set this up. I have an artboard, right? We have, let's say, a rectangle. Let's just put in a repeat grid, for example. Whoops, I've just pressed something. I don't know what I pressed. There we go. Right, so you have this. And then you have another artboard, and you just move this up, right? So XD will notice this. And if you click on this, this is the object that's going to move. And you want to make sure to go to drag. And now you can drag this up, right? On my trackpad, I'm just dragging up and down. So XD notices that this object over here was moved up from this one. So that's the default drag, it's up and down, right? So hopefully that answers your question. But we do have a lot more things in the works that'll help with moving things around. That's all I can say. All right, so now we have that component looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and build out some additional artboards for this onboarding experience. So let me go ahead and just, with this artboard selected, I'm going to duplicate it, Command and Control D, boop, there we go. And now we can just start making changes. So maybe we'll grab this guy over here, drag him in. That looks pretty good. And let's say track progress. And for here, we'll want to dive in here. This will be 40%, this will be 100%. And at some point, I'll probably fill in some of this text, but I want to make sure we get through this. And this will be work together. This will be 40%, and this will be 100%, right? Beautiful. And we need one more image. We'll grab this guy. This guy is just so happy. This guy is my spirit animal. Perfect. This is looking pretty good. Great. Now, the big question is, how do we get from artboard to artboard? So there's a few things we can do. We can either create some fancy animations, may not be necessary. So in that case, we're gonna hop into prototype mode, and maybe we'll click on the second page indicator down here, and we should probably also put maybe an arrow going over to the right, or a next button, or give the ability to drag over, something like that. We'll get to that. So I'm going to drag this handle over to the second artboard, just like that, and we'll choose a tap trigger. And because we don't really need anything animating between these artboards, we'll simply do a simple transition, and then we will do, let's say dissolve, see what that looks like. That's not too bad. I think dissolve will work. And we'll do the same thing for this one. We'll just go back to this artboard. All the other properties came over really nicely. And we can also go back. Just like this, right? Just like that. Perfect. Tap, tap, and we can just keep going back just like that, right? And of course, you've probably seen it in some of my past streams. We can get really fancy with some of these onboarding experiences with animated page indicators. You can have masks to kind of get rid of the text and bring new text in. Alexander saying, is drag option working only artboard to artboard? At the moment it is. The plan eventually is to build it into component states, but that's a big challenge. So the team is working on it, but I don't have a timeline for that. All right. Now you can also swipe between screens. So if you wanted to, let's say on this whole entire description, you want to be able to maybe swipe over to that way. Now, it may not work the way you might think because things aren't really moving. So let me show you. So if we go drag, right? Because we don't really have anything that moves between the two artboards, it's really not going to work, right? So you probably want to avoid that. Someone saying, Zoe's saying, I don't have dissolve in XD. So make sure for dissolve, let me show you. over here in the properties inspector, make sure that the type is set to transition. Once you have that set, then you'll be able to choose dissolve under the animation. Vipin saying from the third artboard, you did not connect the first one. I did not. And now I did. There we go. Now, the nice thing is, because we have this component, this sign-in component at the bottom of our screen on all of these artboards, right? No matter which artboard we're on, we can very easily activate the sign-in experience, and everything looks super nice. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, so how much time do we have left? We have probably like half an hour or so. Let's see, what can we tackle? Let's go ahead and tackle possibly a home screen. So we've got our onboarding, and of course, you know, there's the copy needs to be edited a little bit. The user experience probably needs to be improved to really tell users they can get to the next artboard by either swiping or pressing next or something to that extent. But I do want to move on. I want to create one more artboard, and this is going to be sort of a home screen that will allow us to, maybe not a home screen, maybe like a workout screen, for example, that will allow us to see maybe sessions that might be going on right now or in the future, something like that, right? So we're going to grab our artboard tool. I'm simply going to click, and it's going to realize that I previously used the iPhone XR, XS Max artboard, and it's going to grab another one and just make one for me, which is nice. So on this particular artboard, there's a few things we're going to want. We're going to want some basic information, maybe a profile picture, a menu, a title, a navigation bar, and then we're going to want that bulk content in the middle. So let's start with the simple stuff. Now, I don't have, because I created a new artboard, I don't have my guides on this new artboard. So what we can do is on any of the other artboards, I can select it, go to View, Guides, Copy Guides, and then View, Guides, Paste Guides. Oops, I missed it. Paste guides. There we go. Now we have our guides that we can start working with. So here we go. We're going to start simple. I'm going to grab my ellipse. I'm going to draw one out. I'm holding down the Shift key to constrain it to a perfect circle, just like that. And just like we were talking about earlier with the home indicator at the bottom of iPhones, you also have to keep in mind that there is, right up here somewhere, there is a notch. Our good old notch that we all love, right? There's a notch somewhere at the top, so keep that in mind as well. You don't want to put anything up there because it may not be seen, you may not be able to tap on it, so just keep that in mind. So we've got this, we've got our profile looking pretty good. Now in the center, we may want some text. Whoops. I added one too many S's in there. So this will be sessions, right? I can make it bigger, I can make it smaller. My smart guides help me out throughout this process to let me know that it's centered. It's also centered with that profile icon over to the left. It looks pretty good. Now over to the right, we might want a menu, good old hamburger menu, right? Now we can of course use an icon from a plugins, whatever, a plugin. It's still early, I need more coffee, hold on. We can also just create our own hamburger menu. So with the line tool, let me zoom in here. I'm going to hold down my Shift key to constrain it. I can make it a little bit thicker. I can also round out the caps. This little guy over here, boop, there we go. Beautiful. And I can duplicate one. I can duplicate another. My smart guides are helping me out throughout this process. And now we have a really cute hamburger menu. It's that simple, right? Snap it over to my guides. Beautiful. Now maybe just to give it a little bit of style, I might want to maybe bring one of these in. Why? Why not, right? Just bring one in. Yes, Eric. Eric knows. Coffee. Chug, chug, chug. Yes. What time is it there? It's very early. It's well before noon. That's what it is. So we've got that. Maybe, you know what? Maybe we might want to bring in some of that red because we're not going to have a lot of red on this artboard. So we might want to bring in a little bit. Now, because this is a line and it uses borders, in our assets panel, we would right click and we would choose apply as border. There we go. Edith is asking, is it crucial to name all of your layers and components to avoid problems when prototyping? Yes, very important. Especially when you are animating between two different artboards. Let's do a little side lesson because I love this lesson. Let me create a new artboard. Let me create a circle. Actually, let me create a rectangle, a square, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to assign it this color, right? So here we have a rectangle, right? Or a square. And we might want to animate between this square and something else. I'm going to duplicate this artboard, delete this, and I'm going to draw out an ellipse. Beautiful circle, right? So we have a square and we have a circle. If I were to go into prototype mode, select the square, drag it over to the second artboard, I'm going to make sure that tap is the trigger, auto animate is the action to allow us to animate between those two artboards. We'll just do ease in and out, and we'll do, let's say 1 second, right? If we press play, watch what happens. Nothing exciting. It just fades between one and the other. And that's because our layers are not set up properly. XD doesn't know that we want to animate between this object and this object, because they're two completely different things at this point. So here's what we have to do. 1, XD looks at the names of layers. 2, XD looks at the types of layers. So if I were on this artboard, name this shape, who would ask that question? Edith. I'm going to name this shape Edith. And I'm also going to name this circle Edith, right? So we now have on both of these artboards 2 shapes, 1 rectangle and 1 ellipse. They're both named Edith. You might think that that would solve all of our problems. It did not. And that's because the layer types are completely different. This is a rectangle and this is an ellipse. So in that case, we need to make sure that they're paths, right? So you can either go to object menu, path, and then make or convert to path, or Command or Control 8, that'll convert it into a path. Do the same thing for this one. So now, on both of these artboards, we have 2 paths, both named exactly the same. And now when you press play and tap, it beautifully animates to the next artboard. So the moral of this story is that if you want to make sure that XD animates the changes across your artboards, the layer names have to be the same. If you're using groups or masks, they both have to be named the same, and the types of layers have to be named the same. And you'll see a little bit more of this probably tomorrow in tomorrow's lesson. Same time, same place, same Behance channel. I'm gonna actually make this a little bit larger, but hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, layer naming is very important when it comes to auto animate in Adobe XD. All right, I'm not loving this hamburger menu, but I think for now we are going to leave it. All right, so we've got our header looking pretty good. Of course, you know, we have this empty looking profile. There's a few things we can do for this. We can either go to Finder and of course grab an image, drag an image in here, and we've got an image, right? But many of you may not have images at your disposal. So let's take a look at a plugin. One of my favorite plugins, it's called UI Faces. It's actually in the process of getting it upgraded. But what UI Faces allows you to do, and we'll explore more of this probably tomorrow, it allows you to bring in faces from a variety of sources, including Unsplash, IMDb. One of my favorites is This Person Does Not Exist. So I'm gonna go ahead and check that on. And maybe Tim will post a link to thispersondoesnotexist.com. It's an algorithm created by NVIDIA, and it generates completely computer-generated people that do not exist. And if I press apply with this circle selected, it's going to generate an image and bring it in. And this person is not a real person. This person does not exist as the source indicates. So I can press apply one more time. It's going to generate another completely random person. And there we go. It's kind of creepy that these are not real people. Liz is asking about PC. So if you right click on your shape, you should be able to convert it. Or I believe it's Control 8, I think it is. Yeah, this person, here we go, Tim. Thank you, Tim. I'm actually going to bring this over here because this is creepy. Like this guy, he doesn't exist. This is a fake person that's computer generated. If I refresh, it's another fake person. Every time I refresh, these are people that are being generated by this algorithm. It's very creepy. We live in a simulation. But anyways, So we've got our header. Now we need a navigation bar at the bottom before we get to the bulk of our content. So I'm going to grab my rectangle. I'm going to draw one out. Again, keeping in mind that we've got our home indicator at the bottom, so we don't want too much down there. So we're going to leave a little bit of extra room at the top for some of our content. Now, white is pretty good for the background. I'm going to move the border to the outside and just make a little bit of a subtle border, just like that. Now, maybe to give this app a little bit of color, just a tiny bit of color. Yeah, everyone's freaking out about that algorithm. It's pretty crazy. I'm going to select the artboard itself. Go back to my layers, and I'm just going to add a little bit of blue to this artboard. Just a tiny bit of blue. Like, I don't want to go too crazy. Just a little bit of blue. That'll just separate the navigation bar, and it'll just give us... Oh boy, Tim is just linking more things. This xdoesnotexist.com. I'm gonna have to. I haven't checked that one out. I'm gonna have to check that one out soon, Tim. So I just add a little bit of blue to this artboard. Very subtle change, but it's gonna add a little bit of flair to our design. All right. So now for the navigation bar, we want a few things. We want maybe an icon for a dashboard. If I bring up my notes, we've got icon for a dashboard, challenges, schedule, maybe a place for our friends to see their progress, and then a button to create a new workout of some sort. And if you follow me on Twitter, I did hint at this. We'll probably get to the animating part tomorrow of this navigation bar. It's pretty fun stuff, but check out my Twitter account and there's a fun post there. So for icons, in this case, I'm actually going to open up a third-party icon manager. Of course, you can use the same icon plugin that we used previously, but I'm going to type out dashboard. I'm going to bring in some icons. That's a good one. And maybe badge possibly for the challenges. There we go. And maybe a calendar. And this icon plugin is called, or icon manager is called Nucleo. And I have some previous icon libraries that I just brought into them. And maybe users. There we go. All right, so we have some icons here. These are looking pretty good. I might want to make them a little bit larger. Now, some of these icons are stroke based. So you might notice that if I start enlarging these, the strokes definitely change. So keep that in mind. Sometimes you'll have to turn off responsive resize, but I'm gonna make these a little bit larger. I don't want to go too crazy. I'm going to turn on my guides. I'm going to make sure that the dashboard is lined up on this side. The user is over here. Make sure that's lined up. You know what? I don't have to worry about lining up right away. We'll get to that in a second. Whoa, that's a large stroke. There we go. Now in the center here, we might want a nice large button so a user can very easily add a new workout of some sort. Alexander's asking, did I try the new plugin Anima for XD? I did. I have been playing around with it. I will be streaming live with Brandon Gross on Monday and Tuesday, and we're going to share our thoughts on the new Anima plugin. So stay tuned for that. So in the center, we might want that nice large image. So I'm going to go, or button. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my ellipse, draw one out just like that. I'm going to grab my asset that we've been using, at least the color, make sure this is centered. Now on the inside, we might want some sort of a plus button. So to do that, there's a few different ways we can do that. We can very easily, create a text layer and use the plus key, or you can just grab a line, draw one out, change the color to white, maybe make it a little bit larger. I'm going to duplicate and flip it right over here. Whoops. Flip it 90 degrees. And now we have a plus button. Simple, right? Make sure it's centered in the middle. It looks like it's almost centered. Make it a little bit larger. That's looking a little bit better. Good, now we have a plus button. And I'm gonna make sure to group these three. And I'm gonna name this ad. Now, we have all these icons kind of floating all over the place, right? We've got this one. I'm gonna make sure that the stroke is consistent, 1.5. And we wanna make sure that they're all nicely aligned from one another. So what we're gonna do is I have the icon on the far right set up against the guide. I have the one on the far left set up against that guide. And what I'm going to do is Richard says, wow, you're streaming with Brandon Gross. Yeah, Brandon's great. I met him and had a great conversation with him at Adobe Max. And we've been trying to get him, he's a crazy busy guy. So we've been trying to get him on Adobe Live for a while. And now's the time. So we're going to be streaming Monday and Tuesday. He's a great dude. So I'm going to make sure to select all these elements. So I've got, in my layers panel, I've got my dashboard, my badge, my calendar, users, and the add button. So I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to click on all of those. And then I can use my distribution options. So I can make sure, one, they're aligned in the middle, and then they are distributed horizontally from each other. And now they're nicely aligned just like that, right? And maybe since this will be maybe the home screen or the dashboard of some sort, or maybe this will be the calendar, for example, we can use that asset and we can just apply it as a border, just like that. Bam. And again, as I mentioned, tomorrow we're gonna get a little bit creative with the plus button. We're gonna explore animation, we're going to explore masking, a lot of different things. But before we get to that, we need some content in this area. So I'm going to make sure to group the navigation bar, just like that. And now, since this is sort of the calendar area of this application that will show our sessions, we may want, a bunch of different sessions just going down this artboard. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start simple. I'm going to grab my rectangle, and this is where we're going to explore repeat grid. It's one of my favorite features in Adobe XD. I'm going to draw out a rectangle just like this. I might want to round out the corners just a touch, right? Just a wee little bit. And I'm not too concerned about the styling of this container just now because we're going to be adding images into it. And because, John is asking which switch are you using or zooming in the part of the screen. So I'm using Wirecast for streaming, and then for zooming, I'm just using the Mac accessibility feature. So I'm holding down Control and just zooming in. But yeah, everything else is done through Wirecast. All right, so we've got our image or placeholder for the image. And because, adding text on images, let me just show you, for example. In my fitness section, let's grab this image here, drag that in, change the mask, right? Because just like we were talking about earlier with these onboarding images, because images have so many different colors in them, it's going to be very difficult to put some text over top of these images without adding overlays or gradients or that sort of thing. So let's get a little bit creative. And I'm going to duplicate this box. I'm going to bring it in a little bit. Let me change the color. I'm going to bring it in a touch, just like this. I'm going to drop the size a little bit. And I'm just going to kind of offset it, just like that. So that we'll have an image in the background, and then we will have some text. So Christina is asking, seems like every XD presentation I see is creating an app. Can this be used for websites also? Absolutely. And in fact, thinking back to many of the masterclasses that I've held and also the daily challenges that I've been running, I've focused a lot on web and desktop applications. So absolutely, you can definitely use this for websites as well. And probably next week, we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right. Thank you, Alexander. And Prakash is asking, are you guys planning on adding a measured custom alignment feature in XD? Short answer is yes, but there's a lot to that. The team is working on some additional things to help with measurements and things like that. Don't know when it's going to be released, but yes. All right, so we've got this little area here. Now, we may want to make sure, because we have a white box on sort of like a bluish light background, we may want to make sure this pops a little bit, just stands out a touch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, again, the last thing you want to do is do this. I get that we want to separate it from the background, but this is just way too harsh. So bring that opacity down, bump up that blur quite a bit, and then, tweak the Y value if you need to. But, probably around 0 might work. And then I'm going to bring that opacity down even more, just like that. And again, if you want to get a little bit creative, you can add a little bit of color in here, just a little bit. Doesn't make a huge difference, but it's a very subtle difference, just like that. There we go, right? So there's without the shadow, and there's with the shadow. Very subtle difference, but it adds a little bit of something there to kind of pop it from the background. So we've got this looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and very quickly add some text. So this might be, let's say this will be the session name, core strength, for example. I'll make sure to left justify that. right about there, right? Add a dark shadow and use papyrus. There we go, Tapan. You are on your way to becoming a designer. Now maybe below we might want to indicate if this is a beginner class and maybe how long it might be. So beginner, for example, right? And then we'll do, let's say 30 minutes. I'm going to drop the size quite a bit. I'm going to drop the weight as well. And maybe I'll even drop the opacity a little bit. Not too much, because then it's a little bit difficult to read. And we always got to make sure, because sometimes if you're zooming in, if you're designing very close, things look great. But then when you actually preview, you're noticing, oh, maybe the text is a little bit too small, especially on a mobile screen. And you can definitely preview your designs on your phone as you're designing. But you want to make sure to open up this preview from time to time to make sure things are looking good. And I am noticing the text is a little bit too small, so I'm just going to bump up both of them. Check out the preview, and that's looking a little bit better, right? There we go. Now down here, we may also want to show, thank you everyone. We may also want to show, maybe how many of our friends have taken this particular course. So I'm going to grab my ellipse. I'm going to draw one out like that, right? Just like that. Let's see what that looks like. Maybe make it a little bit larger. And I'm going to set the border to white for now. Just like that. And now we may want a few additional friends. I don't have very many friends, but at least when I'm designing an XD, I can pretend. So what I'm going to do for this is our first hint at repeat grids. We're going to press repeat grid at the top. Boop. There we go. And you have to when you press repeat grid. And let me, by the way, just reminding me about my audio. Hopefully my audio has corrected itself on YouTube. Hopefully it's not too crazy still. But I'm going to go ahead and just drag out additional cards just like this. So I've got 4 additional friends going across my artboard. I can adjust the padding like this, right? Now, one of the cool features about repeat grids is it allows you to drag in images in bulk. So hopping over to Finder, I've got some great images here. I'm going to just go ahead and select a few of those. And I'm simply going to drag all 4 of those images directly into any of these slots. Boop, there we go, right? I can always just dive in here and make some changes. And what's nice about repeat grids is even though I can adjust the padding like this, I can also set negative padding. So I can just drag these back like that, right? And that looks pretty good. So now I've got 4 friends going across, and I can go ahead and grab this text layer. Let's go ahead and let's just say 24 friends have taken this session, right? And this one might be definitely a little bit smaller. I'm going to drop the weight a touch to about regular and maybe drop the opacity a little bit as well. Something like that. There we go. It's like an old Kung Fu movie. Oh, hasn't corrected itself? Oh no. Well, I'm sorry. YouTube's being YouTube. All right. And that first guy is famous on his XD streams. I use this guy and his amazing beard a lot. It's just a great looking beard. All right, so we've got this looking pretty good. I'll probably make a few changes to some of this design overnight. But if I press play, it looks okay, right? There's maybe one more thing we're gonna add over to the right over here. And that's maybe a star rating. So with my rectangle, I'm gonna drag out this little pill shape and then make sure to round out the corners completely, just like that. And then maybe inside of here, we're gonna have a red container. And this will be the star rating of this particular, oh no, it's still booping? That's awkward. All right, it's a boop loop. Thank you, Tim. Awkward. I'll have to fix that later. It's supposed to stop when it finishes. Anyways, so we've got this in here, and we may want to make a star. So what I'm going to do, here's a pro tip to create a star. I'm going to grab my polygon tool over here to the left. The shortcut key is Y. And I'm going to simply draw one out. I'm holding down Shift to constrain it. Now, of course, this doesn't really look like a star. So there's a few things we can do. One, we have to set how many points are on this star. So right over here, I'm going to choose 5. And then we've got these little handles on the inside. We've got one that can control the roundness of the corners of this particular polygon. We also have another one that allows us to create a star, just like that. Turn off the border. And if the roundness, like if you want, not sharp corners, but you want rounded corners, but this is 2 round. You can also use fractions. So instead of 1, I can do 0.5, for example. That'll give me a nice, subtle, round corner, right? Alexander says, I saw there's a plugin supported by Adobe Whiteboard, but I can't figure out what it really does. I will talk about Whiteboard maybe on Friday. I've been working on a video for Whiteboard. It's a fantastic plugin for collaboration, but with 10 minutes left, may not have enough time. I'm gonna go ahead and let's say 4.9 stars, but it's a great great plugin for collaboration purposes. All right, so we've got our little star rating. That looks pretty fancy. I'm going to talk more about content-aware layout probably tomorrow, but what I'm going to do very quickly, I'm going to grab all these. I'm going to make sure to group them just like we've done many times before. Group, just like that. Star rating. And over to the right, we have the padding option, which turns on content-aware layout. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow, but you can go ahead and enter the padding for this particular group. And essentially what it does, it looks at the relationship between the layers at the top and the background layer, which is the one at the very bottom, and it automatically sets padding. But if you needed to, you can always adjust that there. But what's nice is that if you decide to move the star out, the background automatically moves with it, right? You can go in either direction, up or down, right? So if I wanted to just do something like this, it very quickly rearranges itself, which is nice. All right, so we've got this looking pretty good, right? I'd say make a few changes, possibly. I'll work on that later. But now we might want some additional cards going down our artboard so we can show some additional sessions. Now, the last thing we want to do is have to select all these, duplicate them, make some changes, duplicate them again, make some changes. Really, nobody wants to deal with that. So with all that information selected, and again, you can either do it in the layers panel or just select it all just like this. Up at the top here, you've got your magical repeat grid button. Boop, there we go. And now all you have to do is just drag out additional cards going down your artboard, just like this, right? Now, of course, you want to make sure the navigation bar is above, just like that. And you can also adjust the padding if you needed to. You can be positive padding, negative padding. It's completely up to you, just like that. That looks pretty good. Maybe I'll make it a little bit wider. Now, the big question is, how do we get some additional images in? Very similar to what we did with the photos. I'm going to grab some of these images. We'll grab 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think we have 4. 1, 2, 3. We have 4 cards, I believe. Yeah, I don't want to be president. So we've got 4 images that look pretty good. I think 1 that looks good, 2, 3. We'll go for the running one as well. And we'll simply drag all these images. I think I missed them. Drag all these images directly into XD, and it's going to automatically populate the grid. And we can easily double click, make some changes, move these down a touch, right? There we go. And the running one might look pretty good. Now, even though it's a repeat grid, we can still dive in there and make changes to our text. I'm gonna name this cycling. Maybe this is a 20-minute ride, right? Maybe this is weightlifting. Maybe this is a 60-minute session. That's probably a long time. And this is outdoor run. Let's go for 30 minutes is fine. And this will be intermediate, right? There we go. So another thing we might want to do, because repeat grids allows you to update across all cells, is maybe we'll, tweak the styling a little bit. So maybe for this background shape, just to get a little bit fancy, we might want to add a background blur. Now, background blurs you got to be careful with, because as you can see, depending on the image behind it, it can give a very strange feel to it. So the few things that I love to do when working with background blurs. One, I like to usually blur it a lot. That'll kind of help create a little bit of contrast between the shape, the text, and that background image. Two, I like to brighten it almost as much as I possibly can. That'll, again, create some nice contrast. And then if necessary, you can always bring in some of the color of the original shape just by increasing the transparency value. So what you're noticing now is we have just a little bit You can definitely see it here. We have a little bit of that background image kind of seeping through, and you can always make changes, right? You can blur it a lot, you can blur it a little bit, you can turn down the brightness, adjust the transparency, but I think that looks pretty good. It's very subtle. So if I take a look at the preview, I think things are looking okay. Now I'm going to make a few changes, and because we're working with a repeat grid, it's going to push these changes to all of our cards, which is really nice, exactly what we wanted, right? I might want to also space things out a little bit, so I'm going to select the repeat grid, find my padding, space it out a touch. Yeah, and as Tim mentioned, stick around in 10 minutes. We've got Kathleen coming up with the Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that we have these cards kind of extending down our artboard. Let me actually go ahead and add one more. Let me show you what we're working with. Let's go ahead and add this one over here. And this will be core strength again, right? Move these cards back. And we may want to be able to get to all of these cards. We have them extending down the artboard, but if we press the preview button, and if we try to scroll, nothing really happens. And we definitely don't want that. We want to be able to get down there, right? Here's what we're going to do. With the entire artboard selected, you're going to notice handles all around it. What you're going to do is you're going to grab the bottom handle and you're going to drag it down until you can see the final card. Now, in this situation, you have to keep in mind that we have a navigation bar that we're going to fix in just a moment. So you'll want to add a little bit of extra space down here so for that navigation bar to sit really nicely. And John is asking, how easy/hard is it for developers to take this prototype and turn it into an actual app? It probably depends on your developers, honestly. XD, and we might see this tomorrow, allows you to share developer specs. So you'll be able to share all of your marked assets, padding, CSS snippets, a lot of different things. And there are also some applications that allow you to share even more. But we've heard from developers that it's a very easy process as long as they know what they're developing, right? But you'll see more about the sharing side of things tomorrow. So we've got our artboard extended, and if we press the preview button, we can scroll down, right? But of course that navigation bar is still kind of floating in space. We don't want that. So what we're going to do in this case, we're going to select the navigation bar, and over to the right, we're going to choose fix position when scrolling. We're going to go ahead and press that. We're going to press play one more time. And now when we scroll, that navigation bar stays in place, and we can scroll to see all of our sessions, just like that. And if we really want to get fancy, I don't know how well this is going to work, but we can select the background layer of this navigation bar. We can turn on background blur as well. Maybe blur this quite a bit. Increase the brightness. Again, very subtle background blur. Press play. And as we scroll down, you're noticing that the background blur is rendering in real time, which is really nice. It may be a little bit overdone, may not be necessary. Maybe I'll just bring up the transparency a little bit. I like working with background blurs. I'm cheesy like that. I think that works. It's very subtle, but there we go. We now have our background blur, right? Now, one more thing I want to cover very quickly, right, is, if we were to dive in here into this repeat grid and we were to add an additional image, let's say this one here, pop that in here, right? You're going to notice that it applies that image across all of the repeat grid cells. And that's by design, because repeat grids are meant to distribute styling changes across everything. However, if we were to turn this into a component, just like that, right? And then if we were to go into one of these other ones, let's say we wanted to replace her, we can dive in here. There we go. And you're going to notice it did not update on any of the other ones. So if you are working with repeat grids and you want to make sure you can override some styling or other repeat grids that are nested inside of it, turn it into a component. That way you can very easily override those elements. So that is going to wrap things up for today. We've tackled onboarding. We've tackled the session screen with repeat grids. Tomorrow we're going to get a little bit more advanced. We're going to talk about masking, a little bit more animation, a lot of fun stuff. But thank you to everyone joining me. I apologize for the audio issues. I think it's a YouTube problem, but I will look into it just in case. But a big thank you to Tim and Alexander and RB and Michelle and Richard and Vipin and everyone else joining me. Stick around. Kathleen is coming up in just a few minutes. I will be back tomorrow morning, same time, same place, and I will see you all then. Thanks, everyone.